In the last demo, you saw me using project journals to enter transactions against the project. Let's take a little detour now and take a look at the project journal setup. Again, project journals allow the user with the appropriate authorizations to enter project transactions outside of the typical tracks that project transactions get into projects via timesheet or expense reports or purchase orders. This allows the project accountant to quickly enter transactions at, say, month end to accrue for unposted timesheets, for example. There are 5 types of journals in project accounting. There's the hour journal, which you saw in the last example, which is a journal way of entering time for time-based transactions against a project, such as hours worked by a worker. There's also a journal called a fee journal, which is a way of entering revenue-only transactions. So if I charge a setup fee for initiating a project, I can use a fee journal. And of course, these are only valid for externally facing projects, such as time and materials. There's the expense journal, which is analogous to an expense report. So I can post project expenses such as travel against a project. There's an item journal, which is a way of posting inventory transactions for materials against projects. One thing to note here is they can only be used for stocked items. And then finally, there's a thing called the beginning balance journal. Beginning balance journals are special journals that can be used to load project transactions into the project subledger without affecting the general ledger. So mainly these things are used for the migration phase of an AX implementation. So here you could put the details of an in-flight or closed project into your project ledger without affecting the general ledger, which you would most likely load in bulk via the GL. So with these journals, you can make it appear as AX has always existed, and you can have project transaction history in the system. So let's take a quick look at some of the setup that needs to be done to get these journals to work. So we'll go back to the area page. And some journals are set up in the project management and accounting module itself. Some are set up in the general ledger module, and some are set up in the inventory and warehouse management module. So let's take a look at the project journals first. The first thing to do is to go to journal names and define your journals. Here we've got a few defined already. And the journals that you define here are the hour journal, fee journal, and beginning balance journal. And here I've defined an hour journal. And the way I do that is I choose the journal type, which then drives some of the other options here on the form. The most important thing on this form is the number sequence. When you create an AX implementation, it generates number sequences. And these are basically numbering for the documents. And the most important thing here is to set the voucher series. And right now we've set it at this project hours journal ID. Additionally, there's a way of on the hour journal adding approval groups. These kind of mimic a workflow. It controls, you can add users to these groups and controls whether they can view journals or they can update journals or they can post journals. It's kind of like workflow, but it's not the same workflow that you see in timesheets. Fee journals can also be set up here. It's kind of the same thing. There is no approval for fee journals, so the thing you have to worry about here is the voucher series again. And then beginning balance journals are also set up here. Another thing to note with beginning balance journals is a lot of times you'll see the button on the project form, but you won't see it activated. Another thing that controls these journals is the project stage rules. So you can see here for time and materials, if I go to the project stage rules, I can turn off the creation of journals, but I can also turn off the creation of beginning balance journals. If I deselect that switch then controls whether you see it on the project form. So we've talked about the journals that are set up in project accounting module. We didn't talk about the project expense journal. It is set up underneath general ledger, underneath journals. Here you see all the general ledger journals. Project expense journal is one of the general ledger journals. The way you do that is you create it, and when you pick your journal type, you pick project expenses. Again, the important thing to fill out here is the voucher series to control the ID number that's generated when you post this journal. The last journal that you can post in the project accounting module is the item journal, and that is done underneath inventory management. Under journals, it's an inventory journal, and then you pick the journal type of project, and it fills out some defaulting thing. And again, to emphasize this, the important thing that you need to fill out is the voucher series. Another detail that we need to take a look at that you may have noticed is when I posted the hour journal, I entered a quantity, but I did not enter any sort of price, either on the sales side or the cost side. Another detour we need to make is around the defaulting of cost and sales prices. You may have noticed when I was entering the hour journal, I never entered a cost or sales price. I just entered units. And yet, when I posted the journal, it determined a cost amount, and when I invoiced the project, it determined a sales amount. So what I've done there is I've set up cost prices for my hours and for my expenses. If you want to do this for items, you need to set them up in the inventory and warehouse management under materials for items, and that's beyond the scope of this course. But let's take a look at cost and prices for hours and expenses. So over in AX, underneath prices, you can see we have cost prices for hours and expenses. And here is where I define the most basic piece of setup that you need to do is you can define an effective date, and then you can define for everything, any unit of hours that's posted, you can define a cost price. Here we've done it for $180. And then you can get even more fancy in terms of defining it for categories, customers, workers, project IDs, price groups, and effective labor rate, which we'll talk about in an advanced module. So here you can see that we've also defined cost prices for different categories of work. So for example, PM, project management, has a default cost of $200 per hour. We've also defined for specific workers, if this person does project management work, they get this cost price defaulted to them. Expense costs are the same thing. We'll set one up very quickly here. So for here, I've defined a mileage rate. If I charge mileage to a project, it will be $5 per quantity. Cost prices are always set up per quantity. If a customer will be invoiced for transactions, the sales price is specified either per unit as a markup percentage of cost price plus a flat amount, or contribution margin ratio. Sales prices are really only used in time and materials projects. In fixed price projects, sales prices are ignored, and the contract price determines the revenue that the project earns. Sales prices are pretty much set up the same way as cost prices. And again, you set up sales prices for hours, expenses, and for this one, fees, since they're revenue only. Item sales prices are set up in the item master and beyond the scope of this course. So let's hop over to AX and take a look at a sales price setup. You'll see this is pretty similar to what we've just looked at in cost prices. Let's take a look at an expense sales price. Now, again, you could set up sales prices per unit, per category, per worker, per contract, per project, or sales price quantity model gives you another option where we just spoke about how you could use it to define a markup. So let's do that for this year. We'll define a markup over cost of 20%. So anytime I enter a cost transaction, it's going to mark it up by 20% on the sales side. So let's take a look. We'll go back to our project that we just did a demo on and take a look and see how that manifests itself. So we'll open our project. Again, remember we set up an expense sales price markup. Let's use an expense journal. We'll use this in the interest of time versus using an expense report. So now let's do some travel. We'll use a quantity of 1. Let's enter a cost price of $100. Now you notice that it marked it up, the sales price, to $120. It used that sales price setup quantity that we just took a look at.